Imagine this. A mother so desperate for a grandchild that she takes matters into her own hands, inviting 7 children to her house under the pretense of an unusual interview. But here's the twist: her son, the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, had no idea he was part of this plan. And when he finds out, let's just say it changes everything. This is a story about family, secrets, and the lengths people go to in pursuit of happiness or control. It's also about how life has a funny way of turning plans upside down, even when you think you've got everything figured out. The story begins with Evelyn Harper, a woman who always dreamed of being called grandma. She wasn't asking for much, just one grandchild would do. But as time ticked on, and her only son, Daniel Harper, showed no signs of settling down, Evelyn grew restless. Daniel was brilliant, successful, and at the helm of his own tech empire by the age of 35. Everyone that admired him. But Evelyn couldn't help feeling like something was missing. The problem, well, according to Evelyn, it all boiled down to one thing. Daniel never dated seriously. He worked too hard, traveled too often, and seemed completely uninterested in starting a family. What Evelyn didn't know, however, was that there was another reason behind his lack of commitment, a secret he kept buried deep inside. Evelyn wasn't the type to sit back and wait for fate to intervene. If anything, she believed in taking charge, especially when it came to matters of the heart. So, after months of sleepless nights and endless brainstorming sessions, yes, she treated this like a corporate strategy. She decided to take drastic action. Her solution: a bold plan involving 7 kids from local foster homes and orphanages. These weren't random kids either. They were handpicked based on their personalities, interests, and even physical resemblance to Daniel. Evelyn's logic was simple yet bizarre. If Daniel thought adopting a child might give him a sense of purpose, maybe he'd finally agree to become a father, and who knows, maybe one of these kids could fill the void in both their lives. Now, before we dive deeper into what happened next, let's talk about Daniel for a moment. On paper, he was every parent's dream: intelligent, driven, and financially secure. He embodied success, but beneath the polished exterior lay layers of complexity. Growing up, Daniel had always felt immense pressure to live up to his mother's expectations. While most kids played outside, he attended business seminars with his dad or studied coding manuals late into the night. By the time he reached adulthood, he'd built not just a career but a fortress around himself, a defense mechanism against vulnerability. That's why Evelyn's meddling cut so deeply. To Daniel, family wasn't just complicated, it was something he avoided altogether. Back to Evelyn's scheme. One crisp Saturday morning, she welcomed the 7 kids into her sprawling suburban home. There were boys and girls ranging in age from 6 to 14, each carrying their own unique quirks and stories. Some were shy, clinging to the edges of the living room couch, while others bounced around with boundless energy. Evelyn greeted them warmly, explaining that today's event was a special interview where they'd get to meet someone very important later in the day. She made sure to keep things light and fun, offering snacks, games, and plenty of laughter. Little did the kids know they were pawns in a game far bigger than themselves. Meanwhile, Daniel was blissfully unaware of the storm brewing at his childhood home. That same morning, he was holed up in his penthouse office, reviewing quarterly reports and preparing for a major merger. His phone buzzed incessantly with emails and calls, but nothing prepared him for the text message he received from his assistant around noon. It read, *, your mom said to be home by 2 p.m. sharp. She says it's urgent. *. At first, Daniel rolled his eyes. Urgent. Knowing Evelyn, it probably involved another charity gala or some trivial family drama. Still, guilt gnawed at him. He hadn't seen his mom in weeks, and despite their differences, he loved her dearly. Against his better judgment, he decided to leave work early and head over. As Daniel pulled into the driveway, he noticed several pairs of tiny shoes lined neatly by the front door. Confused, he stepped inside to find the house alive with chatter and giggles. Toys littered the floor, and the scent of freshly baked cookies wafted through the air. For a brief second, he wondered if he'd accidentally walked into a daycare center. Then he saw Evelyn standing in the kitchen doorway, wearing an apron and a nervous smile. *Daniel, darling, she began, her voice trembling slightly, I have a surprise for you. Before Daniel could respond, a chorus of small voices erupted from the other room. *Hi, Mr. Harper. They chimed in unison, peering curiously at him. That's when it hit him something was terribly wrong. Who were these kids? Why were they calling him Mr. Harper? And more importantly, why did his mum look like she was about to faint? As the pieces slowly started coming together, Daniel's shock turned into anger. How could she manipulate him like this? Did she really think forcing him into parenthood was the answer? But then, something unexpected happened. One of the kids, a freckled boy named Max, stepped forward hesitantly, holding out a drawing he'd made earlier. "This is for you," he said softly, his big brown eyes filled with hope. Daniel froze, unsure of what to say or do. In that split second, he realized this wasn't just about him anymore. These kids weren't props in Evelyn's master plan. They were real people with dreams, fears, and hearts that could break just as easily as anyone else's. Suddenly, The weight of the situation crashed down on him, leaving him torn between fury and compassion. What happens next will change the course of everyone's lives forever. Will Daniel confront his mum and send the kids away, or will he find himself unexpectedly drawn to the idea of fatherhood? Can Evelyn repair the damage she's caused, or will her well-meaning intentions drive a permanent wedge between her and her son? And most importantly, what role will these 7 kids play in unraveling the tangled web of secrets within the Harper family? Stay tuned to find out, because this story is far from over, and trust us, you won't want to miss what comes next.
As Daniel stood there, gripping the edges of the drawing Max had handed him, his mind raced with questions. The weight of the situation pressed down on him. But it wasn't just anger, he felt it was confusion, guilt, and even a flicker of curiosity. He glanced at Evelyn, who looked paler than usual, her hands twisting nervously in front of her apron. For as long as Daniel could remember, his mother had always been larger than life, confident, decisive, and unapologetically bold. Seeing her like this, vulnerable and unsure, made him pause. Maybe she hadn't acted out of malice, but desperation. Still, that didn't excuse what she'd done. Evelyn finally broke the silence, her voice trembling. "Daniel, I know this. Looks well insane. But you have to understand where I'm coming from. You work all the time. You never bring anyone home. And I just want to see you happy." Her words hung in the air, raw and honest. Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but no sound came out. How could he explain to her that happiness wasn't something he knew how to chase? His entire life had been about achieving goals, meeting expectations, and climbing higher. Love, family, vulnerability, those were foreign concepts to him, ones he'd buried under layers of ambition and routine. The kids, sensing the tension, began to shuffle awkwardly. One little girl named Lily tugged gently at Daniel's sleeve, her wide eyes searching his face. "Are we in trouble?" she asked softly. The innocence of her question struck Daniel like a punch to the gut. These weren't pawns in some twisted game. They were children looking for connection, stability, maybe even love. And here he was, caught in the middle of his mum's chaotic plan, unable to decide whether to yell, walk away, or stay. While Daniel wrestled with his emotions, Evelyn tried to salvage the moment. She ushered the kids into the dining room, setting up crafts and snacks to keep them occupied while she pulled Daniel aside. In hushed tones, she explained her reasoning, or rather, her fears. "I thought, if you met these kids, saw how wonderful they are, maybe you'd realize that having a family doesn't have to be complicated," she admitted. "I didn't mean to ambush you. I need to know you're not going to spend your whole life alone." Her confession hit close to home. Deep down, Daniel knew his isolation wasn't entirely by choice. Years ago, during a routine medical checkup, he'd received news that shattered his perception of himself. He was infertile. At first, he'd convinced himself it didn't matter, he didn't have time for relationships anyway. But over time, the diagnosis became a wall he couldn't climb, a reason to push people away before they got too close. He'd never told Evelyn, fearing it would break her heart. Now, standing in the middle of her misguided scheme, he wondered if keeping that secret had only made things worse. Meanwhile, the kids started forming their own opinions about Daniel. Max, the boy with the freckles, decided he liked him despite the initial awkwardness. "He seems nice," he whispered to Lily as they colored pictures together. "Even if he looks really confused right now." Lily nodded, adding stars and hearts to her artwork. "Maybe he just needs practice being around kids," she suggested optimistically. Their conversation was innocent, but it carried a truth Daniel couldn't ignore. These kids weren't judging him. They weren't expecting perfection or grand gestures, they just wanted someone to care. Back in the kitchen, Evelyn pleaded with Daniel to give the idea a chance. "You don't have to adopt anyone today," she said, her voice softening. "Just spend some time with them. Get to know them. Who knows? Maybe one of them will change your mind about everything." Daniel hesitated, torn between walking out and staying to prove her wrong. But then he remembered Max's drawing, the careful lines, the bright colors, the effort behind it. Something inside him shifted. Maybe this wasn't just about Evelyn's dreams anymore. Maybe it was about giving himself permission to imagine a different kind of future. Over the next few hours, Daniel found himself reluctantly drawn into the chaos. He helped Max build a Lego tower, listened patiently as Lily described her dream of becoming an astronaut, and even joined in a game of tag that left him breathless and laughing a sound he hadn't heard from himself in years. Each interaction chipped away at the walls he'd built around his heart, forcing him to confront emotions he'd long suppressed. Yet, the more he connected with the kids, the angrier he became at Evelyn for putting him in this position. Didn't she realize how messy and complicated this was? Or how much it hurt to consider possibilities he'd written off long ago? As the afternoon wore on, tensions simmered beneath the surface. Evelyn watched anxiously from the sidelines, hoping against hope that her gamble would pay off. The kids, oblivious to the adult drama unfolding around them, continued to charm Daniel in ways neither he nor Evelyn expected. By the time dinner rolled around, the house buzzed with a strange mix of joy and unease. Daniel sat quietly at the table, observing the lively chatter and laughter. For the first time in years, he felt like he was part of something bigger than himself, but at what cost? Then came the moment that pushed everything to the brink. As dessert was served, Max turned to Daniel with a serious expression. "Do you think you could ever be my dad?" he asked bluntly, catching everyone off guard. The room fell silent, the weight of the question hanging heavy in the air. Daniel froze, unsure of how to respond. Evelyn gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. Even the other kids stopped talking, waiting for an answer. It was clear now. This wasn't just about Evelyn's desire for a grandchild or Daniel's struggle with infertility. This was about trust, responsibility, and the courage to take a leap of faith even when the outcome was uncertain. Daniel's response would determine not only his own future, but also the futures of 7 children who dared to believe in him. Would he rise to the occasion, embracing the mésalliances of love and family? Or would he retreat back into the safety of his carefully constructed world? The clock ticked louder with each passing second, building suspense as the story hurtled toward its climax. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The room stayed silent for what felt like an eternity. Daniel stared at Max, the boy's hopeful eyes piercing through him, searching for an answer he wasn't sure he could give. His mind raced with all the reasons why this moment was infertility, his lack of experience as a parent, the sheer chaos of taking on such a responsibility. But then he looked around the table at Lily beaming with stars in her artwork, at another child giggling over spilled milk, and something shifted inside him. Maybe it wasn't about perfection or having everything figured out. Maybe it was simply about showing up. Taking a deep breath, Daniel leaned forward and met Max's gaze. "I don't know if I can be your dad," he said slowly, choosing each word carefully, "but I promise you this: if you'll let me, I'll try my best to be someone you can count on." The room erupted into murmurs, but Max's face lit up with a grin so big it seemed to fill the entire space. Evelyn, tears streaming down her cheeks, clasped her hands together, overwhelmed by relief and gratitude. For once she didn't say a word. She just watched as Daniel stepped into uncharted territory, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. That night, after the kids had gone home and the house grew quiet, Daniel sat across from Evelyn. In the dimly lit living room, there was still tension between them, but it was softer now, tinged with understanding. "Mum," Daniel began, his voice steady yet heavy with emotion. "What you did today, it was reckless, selfish, and completely insane." Evelyn flinched, ready to defend herself, but Daniel held up a hand to stop her. "But," he continued, "it made me realize something important. I've spent my whole life running away from things I thought I couldn't handle. Turns out, maybe I'm stronger than I gave myself credit for." Evelyn nodded, guilt etched across her face. "I never meant to hurt you, Daniel. I saw how lonely you were, even when you pretended otherwise. And I wanted more for you, for both of us." Her voice cracked, and Daniel reached over to squeeze her hand. In that gesture, years of misunderstandings and unspoken pain began to melt away. They weren't perfect, and they probably never would be, but in that moment, they chose to meet each other halfway. Over the next few weeks, Daniel threw himself into learning more about adoption and foster care. He met with social workers, attended parenting classes, and even invited some of the kids back to spend weekends at his penthouse, a decision that shocked everyone, including himself. It wasn't easy. There were tantrums, late-night emergencies, and moments where he questioned whether he was cut out for this. But every time he saw Max's laughter or Lily's determination to show off her latest drawing, he remembered why he'd started this journey in the first place. As for Evelyn, she vowed to step back and let Daniel navigate this new chapter on his own terms. She still dreamed of being called Grandma someday, but she understood now that love couldn't be forced, it had to grow naturally. Instead, she focused on supporting Daniel however she could, whether it was babysitting during busy workdays or helping him pick out furniture for the kids' rooms. Their relationship transformed in ways neither of them expected, becoming deeper and more authentic than ever before. Months later, Daniel officially adopted Max and 2 other children from the original group of 7. It wasn't the traditional family he'd imagined growing up, but it was theirs, a patchwork of hearts stitched together by choice and courage. On the day the adoption papers were signed, Evelyn stood proudly beside him, tears streaming down her face as she hugged each grandchild tightly. "About time," she whispered to Daniel, her voice thick with emotion. He laughed, pulling her into a rare embrace. For the first time in years, he felt truly whole. Looking back, Daniel realized that Evelyn's misguided plan had been a catalyst for change, not just in his life, but in the lives of those 7 children who dared to believe in second chances. Love, he learned, wasn't about biology or perfection. It was messy, unpredictable, and sometimes downright terrifying. But it was also the most rewarding risk anyone could take. And while he still juggled the demands of running a tech empire, he no longer saw his role as CEO as separate from his role as a father. Both required patience, resilience, and a willingness to adapt when things didn't go according to plan. The story ends not with fireworks or dramatic declarations, but with quiet moments that speak volumes. Like Daniel teaching Max how to ride a bike, steadying the handlebars with one hand while cheering wildly with the other. Or Evelyn sitting cross-legged on the floor, reading bedtime stories to a gaggle of giggling grandchildren. These small victories, These everyday acts of love became the foundation of their new normal, a testament to the power of connection and the beauty of choosing family, no matter how unconventional it might look. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a mother's desperate wish for a grandchild or a CEO's unexpected journey into parenthood. It was about people stepping outside their comfort zones, embracing vulnerability, and finding joy in places they least expected. It reminded us all that families aren't defined by bloodlines or blueprints. They're built through love, trust, and the courage to keep trying, even when the odds feel insurmountable.